The wind didn't howl, it screamed. It was a solid wall of white, moving at the speed of a freight train, and Eliza Thorne was trapped on the wrong side of it. She pulled her scarf tighter, the frozen wool scratching her chin. Her ranch, her entire world, had been reduced to a single, straining post in her hand and the terrifying, empty white of the blizzard. She was checking the northern fence line, a fool's errand, she knew, when a flicker of motion, something dark against the snow, caught her eye. It was not a coyote. It was a child. The Arizona high desert in winter was a place of brutal, uncompromising beauty. For Eliza Thorne, it was simply home. It had been her home for 6 years, first with Mark, and now for 2 years, alone. The small ranch, nestled in a stony valley 30 miles from the nearest town of Prosperity Creek, was all she had left of him. It was her sanctuary and her prison, a daily testament to her own stubbornness. Mark had always said she was tougher than the landscape, a compliment she now clung to as she fought the very elements he'd been praising. The storm had rolled in, not from the north, as predicted, but with a sly, flanking maneuver from the east, sweeping up from the plains and smashing into the high country with a vindictive, personal fury. Eliza had spent the morning securing the livestock. Her 2 horses, stable-bound, stomped nervously. The half-dozen cattle she kept were huddled in their lean-to, tails to the wind. It was the fence line she worried about. If a drift broke the northern posts, her cattle would be scattered halfway to the New Mexico border by dawn. She'd wrapped herself in every layer she owned: wool long johns, 2 shirts, Mark's old canvas coat, and a thick scarf. The cold was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. The snow wasn't powdery. It was a barrage of fine, sharp ice that stung any exposed skin. Visibility was less than 10 feet. Every step was a gamble, her boots sinking to her knees in drifts that had appeared from nowhere. She was debating turning back, the mission clearly impossible when she saw it. A shape, huddled and dark, near the base of a straining juniper tree just yards from her fence. Her first thought was a wolf, or perhaps a calf that had wandered. She squinted, the ice needles stabbing at her eyelashes. It was small, too small for a calf. She moved closer, her heart suddenly a cold knot in her chest. It was a boy. He was curled into a tight ball, his back to the wind, a thin, woven blanket clutched around him. He looked to be no more than 7 or 8 years old. His black hair was matted with ice. His face, when she knelt and brushed the snow away, was a pale, waxy gray. He was Navajo, she knew instantly, from the reservation lands that lay to the north. His moccasins were worn through, and his feet, wrapped in rags, were terrifyingly still. "Oh, God," she whispered, the words stolen by the wind. She shook his shoulder. "Hey, boy, wake up." There was no response. His eyes were closed, his lashes frosted. She pressed her gloved fingers to his neck. For a terrible second, there was nothing. Then, a faint, thready flutter. He was alive, barely. There was no time for thought, only action. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her body. She was not a large woman, but she was strong, her muscles honed by years of ranch work. She hooked her arms under the boy's shoulders and knees. He was shockingly light, a bundle of sticks. She lifted him. The 30 yards back to her cabin became a frozen eternity. The wind seemed to sense her purpose, fighting her, pushing her back, trying to rip the child from her grasp. She lowered her head, moving by memory, not sight. The cabin was a faint smudge of darkness ahead. She fell once, her knee striking a hidden rock, the impact sending a bolt of pain up her leg. She gasped, refusing to drop the boy, and hauled herself back up. She kicked the cabin door open and stumbled inside, the wind exploding into the room with her, sending ashes fluttering from the hearth. She slammed the door shut, cutting off the shriek of the storm, and was suddenly enveloped in a shocking, profound silence. The only sound was her own ragged breathing. She laid the boy on the hearthrug, in the faint warmth of the dying embers. His blanket, frozen stiff, cracked as she unwrapped him. His clothes were thin, soaked, and freezing to his skin. "No, no, no," she muttered, her hands shaking. This was the dangerous part. Mark had taught her about the cold. You couldn't warm a man too fast. She worked with frantic precision. She stirred the fire, adding logs until it roared to life, filling the small room with orange light. She grabbed her heaviest quilt from the bed and her sharpest knife from the kitchen. His thin shirt and leggings were starting to freeze to him. She had to cut them off, her fingers clumsy and numb, as she sliced the fabric, peeling it away from his grey skin. His feet were the worst. They were a sickly, bluish white. Frostbite. Bad. His hands were the same. He was unconscious, his breathing a shallow, hitching gasp. She filled her largest basin with cool water, not warm, never warm to start. She plunged his hands and feet into it, biting her lip as she knew the pain would be excruciating if he were awake. She fetched snow from the bucket outside her door and began to rub it vigorously over his arms, his chest, his legs. The friction meant to restore circulation without the shock of heat. She worked for an hour, her own sweat-soaked clothes steaming in the firelight. She changed the water, adding a touch of warmth, then a touch more. Slowly, agonizingly, color began to seep back into his skin. The terrifying grey receded, replaced by a mottled, angry red. He moaned. Eliza started, relief washing over her so fast she felt dizzy. She lifted him, his small, naked body wrapped in a dry wool blanket, and cradled him, rubbing his back. "You're okay," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. "You're safe. You're warm." He moaned again, a small, animal sound of pain, and his eyes fluttered open. They were dark, terrified, and uncomprehending. He saw her, a white woman, a stranger, and he began to tremble, a deep, convulsive shivering that had nothing to do with the cold. "Shh," she soothed, rocking him gently. "It's all right. You're safe. The storm. I found you in the storm." He spoke, a single word in a language she didn't understand, his voice a dry rasp. Then his eyes rolled back, and he slipped back into unconsciousness, his body finally succumbing to the life-saving warmth. Eliza held him for a long moment, the weight of him suddenly immense. She looked around her cabin, the stone fireplace Mark had built, the empty chair where he used to sit. It had been so long since this house had held anyone but her. She had rescued this boy from the storm, but as the wind rattled the windows, she had the distinct, unsettling feeling that she had just invited a different kind of storm into her life. She laid him on her own bed, piling every blanket she owned on top of him. She pulled a chair to the bedside, a cup of coffee in her hand, and began her vigil, watching the small, frail chest rise and fall. The white fury raged outside, but in the small, firelit cabin, a fragile life was holding on. The night was a long, suffocating battle. The storm didn't relent. It doubled down, as if furious at having its prey snatched away. The wind found every crack in the cabin's chinking, whistling a high, mournful tune that frayed Eliza's nerves. The cabin, usually her fortress, felt like a small, fragile ship on a vast, violent sea. The boy, whom she had begun to think of as David, a simple, strong name from the Bible stories her mother used to read, drifted in and out of a fevered delirium. He would cry out in his own language, words of panic and fear, his small hands clenching the blankets. Eliza was there for every moment. She bathed his face with a cool cloth, forced sips of lukewarm broth between his cracked lips, and spoke to him in a low, steady monotone. "You're safe," she repeated, over and over. "The fire is warm. You are safe here." She didn't know if he understood the words, but she hoped he understood the tone. She studied him in the flickering light. He was painfully thin, his ribs visible beneath his skin, but his features were fine and strong. His clothes, which she had cut from him, were now drying by the fire. She examined them. The moccasins were badly repaired, but the blanket, though old, was a complex, beautiful weave. He was not a stray. He was from somewhere. He belonged to someone. This was the thought that truly terrified her. She was a lone woman, living on the edge of the territory, miles from the law, which in Prosperity Creek meant Sheriff Brody, a man who preferred a quiet life above all else. Relations between the settlers and the Navajo were a fragile, brittle thing, a web of mistrust, broken treaties, and mutual resentment. Taking in a white child would have been complicated. Taking in a Navajo child was dangerous. She must have dozed, her head falling forward onto her chest, when a new sound cut through the wind, a sharp, powerful thud on her cabin door. Eliza shot awake, her heart leaping into her throat. The fire had burned down to embers, and the pre-dawn light was a sick, grey blue. The wind was still loud, but this was different. This was not the storm. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't a knock. It was a summons. She grabbed Mark's rifle from its pegs above the fireplace. She checked the load, her hands steady despite the tremor in her stomach. She moved to the side of the door, pressing her back to the log wall. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice sharp. A man's voice answered, deep and clear, shockingly close. "I am looking for my son." The voice was not the raw drawl of the cowboys or prospectors who sometimes passed through. It was articulate, measured, and held an unmistakable note of command. It was not the voice of a man asking for help. It was the voice of a man who had come to collect what was his. Eliza's eyes darted to the bed. The boy was still, but his breathing seemed to have hitched, as if he recognized the voice even in his sleep. He's here," Eliza called back, her hand tightening on the rifle. "He was in the storm. He's sick." There was a long pause. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind. "I will not harm you," the voice said. "Let me see my son." Eliza took a breath. She was no coward, but she was not a fool. She unbarred the door and pulled it open a crack, the rifle held steady at her hip. The man standing on her porch filled the entire doorframe. He was tall, taller than Mark, and broad-shouldered. He was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, but underneath he wore settler's clothes, canvas trousers, and a thick coat, all of it dusted with snow. His face was stark, carved from granite, his black hair braided and tied back. He looked, Eliza thought, like a prophet from the Old Testament. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto hers. They were filled with a desperate, banked fire. He ignored the rifle. His gaze swept past her, into the cabin, landing on the small form on the bed. A sound, a guttural breath of pure, agonizing relief, escaped him. He pushed past Eliza, not roughly, but with an unstoppable, singular focus, and was at the bedside in 2 strides. He fell to his knees, his broad back rigid. He did not touch the boy, not at first. He just stared, as if memorizing the fact of his son's breathing. He spoke, a string of soft, rapid words in his own tongue. The boy stirred. His eyes fluttered open. He saw the man, and his entire body, so listless for hours, tensed. "Ata," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Father." The man's iron control broke. He reached out a large, calloused hand and gently touched the boy's hair. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against his son's, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Eliza stood by the door, the rifle now feeling heavy and foolish in her hands. She slowly, quietly, set it back on its pegs. She had been watching a man nearly frozen by worry. Now she was watching him thaw. After a long minute, the man stood. He turned to face her. The raw grief was gone, replaced by a profound, guarded gratitude. He was, she realized, much younger than she first thought. Perhaps 30. His face was worn by hardship, not just years. "You saved him," he said. His English was perfect, better than her own, in its way. Precise, formal. "He was at the fence line," Eliza said, her voice quiet. "He was nearly frozen. His feet are bad. I've been soaking them." The man nodded, his eyes scanning the cabin, taking in the scene. The cut-up clothes, the basin of water, the blankets, the rifle. He understood, she saw, everything she had done, and everything she had feared. "I am Elias Stone," he said, offering his name as a formal introduction. "This is my son, David." "Eliza Thorne," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. Elias Stone. A Western name. She hadn't expected it. He looked back at David, who had slipped back into a restless sleep. "I tracked him from the school," Elias said, his voice flat, emotionless. "The storm. I lost his tracks. I thought—" He stopped, swallowing. "I saw the smoke from your chimney. It was the only light for miles." He had tracked his son through that blizzard. The thought staggered her. He must have been out in it for as long as the boy. Yet he stood before her, exhausted, but unbroken. "He needs to rest," Eliza said. "The storm is still bad. You can't move him." "I will not," Elias agreed. He walked to the fire, warming his hands. He was not asking permission to stay. He was stating a fact. You can take the bed," Eliza offered, gesturing to her own bed where David lay. "I'll sleep in the chair." Elias shook his head. "I will not take your bed. The floor is fine." He looked at her, his gaze direct, unsettling. "You have done more than any would have. You saved the life of my son. My debt to you is one I cannot repay." Eliza just shook her head, pulling the coffee pot from the hearth. "There's no debt. He's a child. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Elias said, his voice quiet but absolute. "They would not." He took the tin mug of coffee she offered. Their fingers brushed. His hand was calloused and warm. A current seemed to pass between them, an acknowledgement of the night they had both survived, the child they had both, in their own ways, fought for. "Get some rest, Mrs. Thorne," he said. "I will watch him now." Eliza, suddenly boneless with exhaustion, sank into her rocking chair by the fire. Elias Stone took his place in the chair by the bed, his eyes never leaving his son's face. The vigil had passed from her hands to his, and as the grey dawn finally broke, Eliza Thorne slept, protected for the first time in 2 years by the presence of a stranger in her home. The storm broke on the 3rd day. It didn't fade. It simply stopped, leaving behind a world that was scoured, silent, and blindingly white. The sun emerged, casting a diamond-like glitter over drifts that stood 10 feet high. The world was reborn, but the beauty was treacherous. Elias and Eliza had settled into a strange, unspoken routine. David's fever had broken, but his feet were a serious concern. The frostbite had left them swollen and blistered. He was weak, but he was alive, and his terror of Eliza had been replaced by a quiet, watchful curiosity. Elias was a silent presence, but a powerful one. He was, Eliza realized, a man of profound competence. When he saw her struggling to clear a path to the barn, he simply took the shovel from her and did the work of 3 men in an hour. He splintered a fallen log for firewood with an efficiency that left her breathless. He never spoke unless necessary, but his thank you for a plate of beans or a fresh bandage for David was delivered with the gravity of a signed treaty. They existed in the small cabin like 2 planets in a careful orbit, bound by the small, sleeping boy who was their son. A fragile peace. But the new world, however beautiful, brought new problems. They were low on food. The flour was almost gone, the coffee tin was light, and she needed salt for curing, and, more urgently, medical supplies for David's feet. "I have to go to town," she announced on the 4th morning, pulling on her heavy boots. Elias looked up from where he was whittling a small piece of wood for David, a bird. His face was impassive, but his eyes were sharp. "Prosperity Creek? It's the only place." "It is not safe for you," he stated. "Why? Because of the snow?" "No," he said, not looking at her. "Because of us." Eliza bristled. "It's my ranch. It's my town. I'll be fine." He didn't argue. He simply stood. "I will tend to the animals. David will not be left alone." The ride to Prosperity Creek was arduous. The snow was deep, and her horse, old Samson, struggled. It took her 3 hours to cover ground she usually crossed in 1. When she finally rode onto the town's single, muddy street, it was as if she'd entered a different world. The town was buzzing, emerging from its forced hibernation. Men were shoveling snow off roofs, and the saloon was already loud. She tied Samson outside Henderson's general store and stamped the snow from her boots. The bell above the door jangled. The store, usually a place of warm, cluttered comfort, fell silent. Mr. Henderson, a small man with wire-rimmed glasses, stopped polishing the counter. 2 women in heavy shawls, Agnes and Pearl, stopped their chatter. And in the back, by the pot-bellied stove, sat the man who owned most of the town, Silas Croft. Croft was a big man, not with muscle, but with the bulk of good living. He wore a tailored wool coat, and a silver watch chain was draped across his vest. He was the cattle baron of the territory, a man who believed the world was his for the taking. He had tried to buy Eliza's ranch twice since Mark's death. Her land had the only year-round spring in the valley, a spring he desperately coveted for his sprawling herds. "Well, look who it is," Croft said, his voice a jovial boom that didn't reach his cold, pale eyes. "Mrs. Thorne, we'd almost given you up for lost to the storm. A lone woman like you. It's a dangerous land." "I managed, Mr. Croft," Eliza said, walking to the counter. She handed her list to Henderson. "Just need these." Henderson took the list, his eyes flicking nervously between Eliza and Croft. "Managed, she says?" Croft chuckled, standing and walking toward her. He smelled of whiskey and expensive cigars. "I hear you had company." Eliza froze. News traveled fast. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, come now," Croft said, leaning against the counter, crowding her. "A little bird told me you've been playing nursemaid. Took in one of the reservation runaways. A little Navajo buck." Eliza's blood ran cold. She turned to face him, her chin high. "I found a child in the snow, Mr. Croft. He was dying. I did what any decent person would do." "Decent?" Croft's smile vanished. "Decency is keeping your own kind. You know the trouble we've had. They steal. They're wild. By bringing him into your home, you're inviting to that trouble. You're endangering the whole valley." "He's a child," Eliza shot back, her voice low and furious. "He's a problem," Croft retorted. "And now he's your problem, and by extension, ours." He leaned in closer. "I'm worried about you, Eliza. A woman alone. You're soft-hearted. You're not built for this. My offer still stands. I'll take that hard-scrabble ranch off your hands. Give you a fair price. You can go back east, where you belong." "I belong exactly where I am," Eliza said, her voice shaking with rage. "And my ranch is not for sale, not to you, not ever." Croft's face darkened. The false joviality was gone. "That's a mistake. You're making a powerful enemy, girl. You're harboring a stray, and you're defying me. This land doesn't suffer fools, and it doesn't suffer Indian lovers." He turned to Henderson. "Put her things on my account, Henderson. A gift for the widow." The condescension was a physical slap. "I pay my own way," Eliza snapped, throwing her coins on the counter. They rang loudly in the silence. Henderson, pale and sweating, quickly bagged her flour, salt, and laudanum. "Have it your way," Croft sneered. He tipped his hat, a mockery of politeness. "But when that guest of yours brings his whole family down on you, don't come crying to me. Or to Sheriff Brody. You're on your own." He stalked out of the store. The two women, Agnes and Pearl, gathered their things and scurried out after him, not meeting Eliza's eye. Eliza was left alone in the silence, her money still on the counter. "He's just worried, Eliza," Henderson offered weakly, bagging her goods. "He's a vulture," Eliza said, grabbing the sack, "and you can tell him I said so." She marched out of the store, her head held high, but her heart was pounding. The ride home was faster, fueled by anger. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and blood orange. She'd known this would be hard. She'd known the town would talk, but she hadn't anticipated the open, venomous threat. Croft didn't just want her land. He wanted her gone, and she had just given him the perfect weapon to make it happen. When she rode into her yard, Elias was there, splitting the last of the log. He stopped, axe in hand, and watched her dismount. He didn't need to ask how it went. He saw it in the rigid set of her shoulders, the angry flush on her cheeks. "He's made his move," Elias said. It wasn't a question. "Silas Croft," Eliza said, pulling the sack from the horse. "He knows. He threatened me. He said I was on my own." Elias took the sack from her. His expression was unreadable, but a muscle jumped in his jaw. "You are not alone, Mrs. Thorne." He carried the supplies inside. Eliza stood by the horse, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the western ridge. The world was quiet again, but the peace was gone. The poison of Prosperity Creek had seeped into her valley. The storm of snow had ended, but the storm of men was just beginning. The cabin, which had felt like a refuge, now felt like a fort under siege. The three of them, Eliza, Elias, and David, were an island in a hostile sea. The threat from Prosperity Creek changed the atmosphere. The polite distance between Eliza and Elias evaporated, replaced by the tense, functional intimacy of allies. David was healing. His feet were still tender, but he was now able to sit up by the fire, wrapped in one of Mark's old shirts, which swallowed him whole. He watched Eliza with huge, dark eyes. He had begun to smile, a small, shy curving of his lips when she brought him a bowl of broth. The tension was broken 2 days after Eliza's trip to town. She was cleaning Mark's old rifle, the rhythmic, metallic snick of the oiled rag the only sound in the room. Elias was watching her, his silence heavier than usual. David was asleep. "He will use the boy," Elias said, his voice low. Eliza stopped cleaning. "What?" "Silas Croft. He will not come at you for the land. He will come at you for the boy. He will say you stole him. He will bring the law." Eliza's hands went still. "Sheriff Brody?" "He wouldn't." "David was dying. I have a right." "A white woman has rights," Elias interrupted, his voice edged with a bitterness she had not heard before. "A Navajo has none, and a white woman protecting a Navajo has fewest of all. They will say you are unbalanced, a danger. They will use it to take your land." Eliza set the rifle down. He was right. She knew he was right. "Then what do we do? You can't leave. David isn't well enough. And even if he were, the snow is too deep." "We will be ready," he said simply. He unbuttoned the cuff of his shirt and began, with methodical care, to roll up his sleeve. Eliza watched, confused. He held his arm out to the firelight. Just below his elbow, his forearm was a mass of scarred, puckered tissue. It was an old, horrific burn. Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Elias, what happened?" He stared into the fire, his face a mask. "The story of David is the story of this scar. They are the same." He began to speak, his voice a low, level monotone that seemed to disconnect him from the words. He told her he had not always been Elias Stone. He was born Ashki Nez, tall boy. He was smart, and his grandfather, a Hatawi, a medicine man, saw the world changing. He knew their people could not survive by fighting the white man. They had to learn to walk in their world. So, when Elias was 10, his family had sent him east, to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. "The place where they kill the Indian to save the man," Elias quoted, his voice thick with irony. "They cut our hair, they took our names, they beat us for speaking our own language." He had been there for 8 years. He learned to read and write English. He learned mathematics and carpentry and the white man's history, the one where his own people were the savages. He had been a model student, bright, quiet, and obedient. The scar was from his 3rd year. He had been caught speaking Navajo in a whisper to another boy, a Lakota, who was sick and crying for his mother. The overseer, a man named Master Gable, had dragged Elias to the laundry. "He told me he would burn the dirty language out of me," Elias said, his voice flat. He had been forced to hold his arm against the hot stovepipe until he fainted. "The Lakota boy died a week later. I did not." Eliza felt sick. She reached out, her hand hovering over his arm, but she didn't dare touch it. "Elias, it's barbaric." "It is policy," Elias corrected her. "I returned home when I was 18. I was a stranger to my own people. I wore white men's clothes and spoke in their tongue. I married a woman, Twe Hozo. Beautiful night. We had David." He paused, the silence stretching. "She died 2 years ago. The lung sickness." Now Eliza understood the shared, unspoken grief she had sensed in him. The hollowness she carried for Mark, he carried for his wife. "When David turned 7, Elias continued, his voice hardening, "the new agent at the reservation insisted. The law said David had to go to the new school in Fort Defiance. It was Carlisle, all over again. The same rules, the same beatings." He finally looked at her. "David has his mother's spirit. He is not quiet like I was. He fights back. I went to visit him last week. He showed me his back, the welts. The teacher had used a ruler, a metal one." Elias closed his eyes. "That night, I took him. I took my son and we ran. We were making for the mountains, to a small camp of our people who refused to live on the reservation. We were going to disappear. But the storm, it came too fast. We were separated. I told him to find shelter, to hide. I went to find the horses. When I came back, he was gone. I tracked him for a day. I found him here." The story settled in the small room, heavier than the cold. Eliza finally understood. This was not a boy who had wandered off. This was a father saving his son from a life he had already endured. "Croft can't have him," Eliza said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "Sheriff Brody can't have him. I don't care what the law is. They can't take him back there." Elias looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than grief or gratitude in his eyes. It was respect, a deep, profound acknowledgement. "This is not your fight, Eliza Thorne," he said quietly. "You are in my home," she replied, her voice shaking but firm. "Your son is healing in my bed. Silas Croft threatened me on my own land. It seems to me it is exactly my fight." She picked up the rifle again, her hands no longer shaking. "You said you learned carpentry. The south-facing window has a loose frame. It lets in the draft." Elias looked at her for a long second. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I will fix it." "Good," Eliza said, turning back to the rifle. "And I'll need you to show me how you track. If they're coming, I want to see them long before they see us." The alliance was sealed. It was no longer a matter of host and guest. They were partners. And as David slept peacefully, his chest rising and falling, the two adults who guarded him prepared for war. Silas Croft was not a man accustomed to waiting. He was a creature of crude, immediate action. When he was told Eliza Thorne had, in his words, spat in his eye, he moved to squeeze her. He couldn't risk a direct assault. Not yet. Brody, for all his weakness, would have to act if Croft's men simply burned her out. No, Croft was smarter than that. He would use the land itself. Eliza's ranch survived on two sources of water: the main spring, which Croft coveted, and a small seasonal creek that ran down from the northern ridge, land that Croft owned. It was this creek that watered her small hay meadow, the winter feed for her cattle. A week after Eliza's trip to town, the creek ran dry. Elias, who had been checking the fences, returned to the cabin at midday, his face grim. "He's done it," he said without preamble. "Done what?" Eliza was kneading dough, her hands white with flour. "The creek. He's diverted it. His men have built a dam upstream, on his property. They're sending the water west, to his own herds." Eliza's hand stopped. She looked at the small, precious bag of flour. "My hay. Without that water, the meadow will be dust by summer. My cattle will starve." This was a bloodless, legal, and devastating attack. He was strangling her, and there wasn't a thing Sheriff Brody could, or would, do about it. "He leaves me nothing," Eliza whispered, sinking into a chair. "He'll take the ranch for pennies when I'm bankrupt." Elias stood in the center of the room, his gaze distant, calculating. David, now walking with a slight limp, came and stood by him, slipping his small hand into the man's. "No," Elias said. "He leaves you one thing. He leaves you the spring, the one he wants. But it's not enough for the cattle and the meadow." "It is," Elias said, a new energy in his voice. "If we use it." He knelt, picking up a piece of charcoal from the hearth. On the rough planked floor, he began to draw. "The spring is here," he said, making an X. "Your meadow is here. The land slopes. We don't need a creek. We need a ditch, an irrigation trench." Eliza stared at the drawing. "A ditch? That's 1/2 a mile, Elias. Through rocky ground. It would take a team of men a month." "We are not a team of men," Elias said, standing. "We are two people with nothing to lose. And I was taught carpentry. But I learned irrigation from my people. It is what we have always done. We know how to read the land, how to make the water go where it is needed." Hope, a dangerous, fragile thing, began to bloom in Eliza's chest. "Can we? Truly?" "We can," he said. He looked at her, his eyes intense. "But it is hard, back-breaking work, and we must do it fast, and we will be exposed." "I'm not afraid of work," Eliza said, standing and dusting the flour from her hands. I'm only afraid of losing this place." They began the next morning. The ground was hard, still partially frozen. They had one good plough horse, 2 shovels, and a pickaxe. The work was brutal. Elias, with an engineer's precision, marked a line across the valley, following the most gradual contours of the land. He worked with the pickaxe, breaking the unforgiving earth. Eliza followed with the shovel, clearing the trench. They worked from sunrise to sunset. Every muscle in Eliza's body screamed. Her hands, tough from ranch work, blistered, broke, and bled. At night, she would collapse into her chair, too tired to even eat, while Elias silently applied a salve to her hands. In this shared labor, they learned each other. Eliza learned that Elias's silence was not emptiness, it was observation. He noticed everything, the way she favored her left shoulder, the exact moment she needed to rest before she would admit it. He learned that her stubbornness was a form of courage, that she would work until she dropped without a single word of complaint. They spoke, not in long conversations, but in short, necessary bursts. "The rock here is too deep. We can go around it, to the east. David, bring the water jug." David had become their assistant. He would limp along the line, bringing them water, or a new tool, his face serious with purpose. He was a different boy from the half-frozen child she had found. He was quiet, but his eyes were bright. He would sit and watch Elias work, and when Elias showed him how to chip at the rock, David's chest swelled with pride. He would even, sometimes, direct one of his shy smiles at Eliza. On the 5th day of digging, they were found. They heard the horses before they saw them. 4 riders, silhouetted against the morning sun, sitting on the ridge above them. Eliza's heart stopped. She and Elias stood, shovels in hand, a silent, defiant pair. The riders trotted down the slope. It was Silas Croft's foreman, a brutish man known only as Dutch, and 3 of his men. They reined in, looking down at the half-finished trench. "Well, well," Dutch sneered, spitting tobacco juice near Eliza's boot. "What do we have here? A couple of prairie dogs digging a hole." "Get off my land, Dutch," Eliza said, her voice low. "Your land?" Dutch laughed. "Doesn't look like it'll be yours for long. Heard the creek ran dry. Shame." His eyes slid to Elias. "Or maybe you're just digging a grave for your redskin buck here." Elias stepped slightly in front of Eliza. He held the pickaxe loosely in one hand. He was not intimidated. "This is not your land," Elias said, his voice calm and lethal. "You are trespassing." Dutch's smile faded. He hated being spoken to like this, especially by a Navajo. "Trespassing? Boy, I'm just here to give your lady friend a message from Mr. Croft. He says he's admiring your hard work, but he wants you to know it's a waste of time. He'll own this ditch by spring. Get off my land," Eliza repeated, raising her shovel. Dutch's hand dropped to his pistol. "You're making a big mistake, widow, both of you. Is there a problem here?" A new voice. All of them turned. Sheriff Brody sat on his horse 20 yards away, his face unreadable. Dutch scowled. "No problem, Sheriff. Just a friendly neighborly call." "Doesn't look friendly," Brody said, his eyes on Dutch's hand, still on his gun. "Mr. Croft send you." "I'm on my own time," Dutch lied poorly. "See that you use it to get back to Croft's property," Brody said, his voice mild but firm. "Mrs. Thorne's land is her own, and last I checked, digging a ditch ain't against the law." Dutch glared, his authority punctured. He looked from Brody to Eliza, and finally to Elias. His eyes promised murder. "This ain't over." He wheeled his horse, and, followed by his men, rode away. Eliza let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She turned to Brody. "Thank you, Sheriff." Brody just nodded, not meeting her eyes. "Eliza, you're playing with fire. Croft is a powerful man, and harboring. Well, people are talking. They're saying you're not in your right mind." "I'm in my right mind, Brody. I'm just not on Silas Croft's side. Are you?" Brody sighed, looking at the trench. "I'm on the side of peace, Eliza, and this ain't it. Watch your back." He turned and rode off, leaving them alone in the valley. Eliza looked at Elias. The confrontation had shaken her, but it had also hardened her resolve. She bent down and picked up her shovel. "He called him my buck," she said, her voice tight. "I have been called worse," Elias said, gripping the pickaxe. "Not on my land, he won't," she said. She jammed the shovel into the hard earth. "Not again." They went back to work, the thud of the pick and the scrape of the shovel the only answer to Croft's threat. They had won the skirmish, but they both knew the war was far from over. It took them 2 more weeks, 2 weeks of bone-breaking, soul-crushing labor. But one afternoon, as the winter sun began to dip low, Elias broke through the last wall of earth. A gush of clear, cold water bubbled up from the spring, and following the gentle path they had carved, began to trickle, then flow, down the half-mile trench toward the dormant hay meadow. They stood, side by side, covered in mud and sweat, and watched the life-giving stream. It was a silver ribbon in the fading light. Eliza felt tears sting her eyes, and she angrily wiped them away with a dirty sleeve. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "We did it," she whispered. "Yes," Elias said. He looked at the water, then at her. "We did." They walked back to the cabin in silence. David ran ahead, shouting in Navajo, his limp almost gone. He was, Eliza realized, happy. That night, the atmosphere in the cabin was different. The tension of the work was gone, replaced by a new, more complicated stillness. The project that had united them was finished. The immediate threat from Croft was blunted. And David was well. His feet were scarred, but healed. He was strong. There was no longer a reason for them to stay. Eliza served dinner, a thin stew, but they ate it with a sense of triumph. David, exhausted, fell asleep by the fire almost immediately. Elia and Eliza sat at the small table. The silence stretched. "The snows are melting on the high passes," Elias said finally, his gaze on the fire. "We will be able to travel in a few days." Eliza's heart sank. She had known this was coming. It was right. It was necessary. He had to get his son to safety. But the cabin suddenly felt cavernous. The idea of being here alone again, with Croft just over the ridge, was a cold, suffocating weight. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "To the mountains? To my wife's people? They will take us in. David will be safe there. And Croft, what if he sends men after you?" "Let them come," Elias said, a hard edge to his voice. "They will not find us, and if they do, they will not be on your land. They will be ours." Eliza nodded, staring at the table. "Good. That's good." Elias watched her. He had seen her strength, her unending resilience. He had seen her fight for his son. He had seen her stand up to Dutch, her hands blistered, refusing to back down. He had seen her grieve for her lost husband in the way she stubbornly protected the ranch he had built. He saw in her a spirit that matched his own. "Eliza," he said, and the sound of her first name from him made her look up, startled. "When I came here," he said, speaking slowly, "I came only for my son. I found a woman who was kind, but I thought she was weak. A widow, alone, a victim for men like Croft." He leaned forward. "I was wrong. You are not weak. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Stronger than me. You fight with no one at your back." Eliza didn't know what to say. I do what I have to." "Yes, and so do I." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. "My wife is gone. My home on the reservation is a prison. My people are scattered. I have my son, and I have my heart. It is a scarred heart, like my arm, but it is whole, and it is strong." He turned to face her. "My home, where I am going, is a safe place, a place of stone and sky. But it lacks what you have. It lacks this." He touched the log wall of the cabin. "A home, a hearth. Elias, I am asking you, Eliza Thorne. I am offering you what I have. My son, he loves you. He has not smiled since his mother died, until he came here, with you." Eliza's breath hitched. "I offer you my protection, not just of one man, but of my people. Croft will not dare to touch you. He will not dare to come near the land of 100 Navajo. He will not risk a war for one spring. He is a bully, and bullies are cowards." He took a step closer. "And I offer you my heart, as a partner, as an equal, as a husband. This place, this ranch, it does not have to be your prison. Let it be our fortress. Merge your world with mine. Let us build a life here, together, the three of us." Eliza was stunned into silence. A marriage proposal. It wasn't a desperate plea for a mother for his child. It wasn't a romantic, flowery speech. It was an offer of alliance, a treaty spoken from the heart. It was practical. It was real. And it was, she realized with a sudden, shocking clarity, exactly what she wanted. She had fought so long to be alone, to prove she could survive. But she was tired of surviving. She wanted to live. She looked at this man, his quiet strength, his hidden scars, his profound dignity, and she saw a future. "Elias," she whispered, standing. Crash! The window above the sink exploded, showering the room in glass. A split second of stunned silence, then a whoosh. A torch, wrapped in oil-soaked rags, landed in the center of the room, skidding across the floor. "Fire!" Eliza screamed. Elias was already moving. He grabbed the burning torch and threw it back out the broken window. But it was too late. Another torch sailed through the air, this one landing on the dry roof of the barn. "They're burning the barn!" Eliza cried, running to the door. Elias grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "They don't want the barn. They want us." He grabbed the rifle from the wall and shoved it into her hands. "Take David. Get to the root cellar, now. I'm not leaving you. Go!" he roared, giving her a shove. Outside, the night was filled with shouts and the terrifying, hungry crackle of new fire. Croft hadn't waited for spring. He had come to end this tonight. The night air turned acrid with smoke. The barn was an inferno, painting the snow-lit valley in a hellish orange. "Get David to the root cellar!" Elias shouted, grabbing his axe as Dutch and his men circled the cabin with torches. Eliza hid the terrified boy, then emerged with Mark's rifle. She fired a warning shot, scattering the men. Elias used the distraction, moving like a shadow not to fight the men, but to cut their horses loose, stranding them. Dutch spotted him and fired, a bullet grazing Elias's ribs. As Dutch leveled his pistol for a killing shot, Eliza dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired. The bullet struck Dutch's revolver, which exploded in his hand. He screamed, clutching his shattered wrist. Leaderless, wounded, and now on foot, the remaining men fled into the darkness. Elias, ignoring his wound, ran into the smoking stable to free Eliza's horses, just as the main barn collapsed. They sank to the ground, exhausted. "It's gone!" Eliza wept, staring at the ashes. "They are made of wood!" Elias gasped, clutching his side. "We are not!" In the grey dawn, surrounded by the ruins of her old life, Eliza met his gaze. "You asked me a question," she said, her voice hoarse. "My heart and my home. Yes, it's yours." Elias pulled David from the cellar. The boy, seeing they were safe, ran and hugged Eliza for the first time. The three stood together in the smoking yard, a broken but defiant family. "We will rebuild," Elias said, picking up the axe. "But first, we fix the fence." A life is not defined by a single moment, but a single choice can change its entire course. For Eliza Thorne, a choice made in a blinding snowstorm to save a life when others would have turned away brought her to the brink of ruin. It cost her the fragile peace she had built and the barn her husband had raised. But in that fire, she forged something new. She found a partner in Elias Stone, a man who saw her strength, not her solitude. She found a son in David, a boy who bridged the gap between two worlds. Their story is a testament to the fact that a home is not just wood and stone, but the courage of the people who defend it. They didn't just rebuild a barn, they built a family, an alliance that proved stronger than the greed of men like Silas Croft and tougher than the brutal land they all called home. If their story of resilience, courage, and unexpected love moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. And for more true life stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.